What's up, everybody? I hope you're doing well. Welcome to the extended cut, minimally edited podcast version of today's episode, where we are going to dive into the land of passive income. Here's the thing. Passive income. It's one of those like trendy, cool to talk about topics. But then when you get into the nitty-gritty of it, it's just a lot more nuanced and complicated and than meets the eye initially, even though it's like a really sexy topic to talk about. In the extended cut version of the episode, you'll hear more detail, more ramblings, more sprinklings of maybe my own personal anecdotes. And let's be honest, today's episode is only like halfway scripted, so even the shorter version is going to be a bit rambly, but hopefully it's helpful to you. And I'll say something right at the beginning of the episode that I've mentioned in a prior episode about passive income, that when I'm using that phrase passive income, what I'm really referring to for today's purposes is leveraged income. But that phrase is not as sexy and not as search friendly as passive income, because no income is truly passive. Like you just show up and money comes in. There's some things that approach that, but generally that only exists if you are already sitting on top of a very large pile of cash and then you are investing that money wisely so that you can reap the dividends very passively. But we're not talking about that today, because most of us, I don't know, if you're already sitting on a giant pile of cash, then like, good job, I guess. You probably don't need to watch this then. When we talk about leveraged income, we're talking about income generated after the moment when you put in work. So when we see therapy clients, that is very active income. I see you for 50 minutes and I get paid for those 50 minutes. It's not like I spent 50 minutes on something and I keep seeing payouts from that 50 minutes, a long time from now. It's happening in real time. So today we're talking about leveraged income. Whether it's big money or little money, we're talking about money that you're able to generate after you already put in the work before. There are a lot of different ways to generate leveraged income, but for most of us who are looking to generate money after we put in some work, usually we're looking at starting a business to do that. Now, starting a business doesn't equal passive income. Probably still most businesses are trading time for money. Like when you see a therapy client in private practice, that's very active income. And if you cut somebody's hair, if you own your own hair salon, then that's very active income. But we might say, if you have a bunch of employees who are working at that hair salon, that could start to look more like leveraged income. Or if you create some sort of product or service that you can create one time and then just continue to market and sell, that would be an example of leveraged income. And I think for most of us looking to build leveraged income, we're probably looking at doing so in some sort of business format like this. Recently, I was watching an episode about passive income by Ali Abdaal. I think he's great. I will link to that episode below, where he shares a lot of helpful information about how to come up with a business idea that generates passive income. And a statistic he referenced in that episode was he just put a poll out for his audience. So this may be a biased, self-selected group of folks who are interested in his content. But amongst the people who responded to his Instagram poll, 71% of people who replied wanted to someday start a business, but hadn't yet started that business. So that tells me, at least for Ali Abdaal's audience, there are a lot of people interested in starting their own business, and I get it. I have 2 of them, and I love it. It allows me to create the work-life balance that I want for myself, and I think it's amazing. So understood why this is so popular. And let me make clear, I thought that this episode that I watched was very useful and the advice that he shared, but also, as I watched the episode and I was agreeing with everything that he said, I was thinking, there's some pieces that are coming to mind to me as I hear him talk about, how to have success with passive income that I think are worth spending some time with. In fact, I've kind of started shying away a little bit, not completely, from talking about passive income, just because I've become more aware over time as I've worked with different people, different therapists, even friends of mine who are looking to generate passive income, and then they hit these different snags along the way. And, time passes and it never comes to fruition. So I am aware of that whenever I sit down and record an episode where I'm going to say, hey, here's how to generate passive income. Here's my tips, steps 1, 2, and 3 that I think are great. I watch somebody else try to implement them and it doesn't work out. So today I want to speak to that a little bit, inspired by Ali Abdal's episode. Thank you, Ali, for the inspiration for today's video, where we want to look a little bit more at the hurdles, at maybe some of the deeper psychological hurdles that can come up that keep us from having any kind of traction with generating passive income in some sort of business model. So if you have wanted to generate passive income, tried generating passive income, maybe failed at generating passive income, this episode is for you. And for today's purposes, I'm going to just use the phrase passive income. Just know whenever I say that, I'm really referring to leveraged income, okay? I think you're keeping up though. If you're new around here, or if it's just helpful to name it, I personally have 2 businesses. I have a part-time therapy practice where I see therapy clients. I love it. And then I spend the other half of my time running private practice skills, which is where you are experiencing either this video or podcast right now. And I generate mostly passive income from this business. A little combo, I should say. There's some passive and some active income. I've had episodes in the past where I talk about how I generate income from this business, so I won't rehash all of it, but let's just say I'm like 7 years deep into generating passive income, so I have my own personal anecdotal experience, and then naturally, because it's kind of trendy, then folks will ask me about how to set up their own passive income business, and I have informally and a little bit more formally coached a few different folks through this. And let's just put it this way. I've yet to witness another person generate passive income in their endeavors as I've coached somebody through this. That may just be a reference to like, don't go to me for coaching. Perhaps. I mean, there's a reason why that's not a service provided on my site. But the reason why I'm sharing that is also because as I've watched people try to lean into generating passive income through some business idea, I've just seen all the ways that it can go sour, all the ways that it can flop. And I've shared in episodes past that we should expect, if we're going to start a new business idea, that most of the time it will flop. Like, I have started many businesses before that never came to fruition. This one is not the first one I've tried. I have had many flops along the way. We should say I have 2 businesses, private practice skills and my therapy practice. The other ones all flopped. There were a bunch. So there's that as well. And just for reference, I kind of stopped sharing numbers a little while back just because, I don't know, that I have conflicted feelings about how helpful that is. But let's just say I split my time 50-50 between my therapy practice and private practice skills. But the vast majority of my income right now comes from private practice skills. So so far, it's successful. Let's just say it's working out. Okay, so I have 2 main points that I would like to convey in this episode as my sort of like reflection in response to this Ali Abdal episode that I watched. The first point that I'd like to emphasize, hot take, I know, is if your primary motivator is to make money, you're setting yourself up for failure. I know. How does that even make sense? We're talking about generating passive income, so obviously you're looking for ways to make money. But here's the thing. Most of the time with passive income, you have to work for a very long time before you generate even a little bit of money. So even though obviously you're starting a business because the intent and hope is that you can generate income from it, if your only motivator, and even I would argue if your primary motivator is to generate income, it's really going to be difficult to have success because you are not going to make money for a very long time. I know. See, okay, here's my theory. I think when people are selling you like a course or something on how to generate money passively, they want to make it sound like it's possible and it's easy, and it is possible. But you're going to have to work for a really long time before it generates any sort of meaningful income, even on a smaller scale. Like if you're just looking to increase your income by a few $100s a month, it takes a lot to get there. It took me a full year of working at Private Practice Skills 20 plus hours a week before I even saw my first payout, which was like $200. So you got to have that mindset going into it. I have so much empathy for being in the position of saying like, I need to make money like yesterday. So if there's a way to generate passive income, sign me up. I will put in the work because I need to make more money, period. I don't care what route it is. Tell me what the most effective route is. What's so-and-so doing? It seems to be working for them. I could do that. I could do that. I'm going to do that because I really need the money. So I have so much empathy for just the hardship that comes from being in that position. And if the goal is to make money, it's going to be much more difficult to get to that payout if there isn't something much more substantial and intrinsically motivating behind whatever business idea you're generating. Because in reality, if we're thinking about something that you would need to dedicate, I would say like a minimum of like, let's say 5 hours a week, which I know is already asking a lot if you're overworked and not earning enough money. But if you did a minimum of 5 hours a week and you had to do that week in and week out for at least a year potentially before generating any income from that effort, even a small amount of income, it's going to be really easy to burn out, to lose momentum, to lose sight of why am I doing this 5 hours this week if I'm still not going to see a payout potentially for 10 months or for another 6 months. Or, it's easy to just let it slide off the to-do list because no one's paying you for those 5 hours. So I think the motivator that's far more important than earning income is what's something that I can intrinsically stay motivated to do consistently for a very long time without getting paid. And if someday I might get paid for it, that would be awesome. That's the mindset that I think is much more sustainable when it comes to building a business that could someday generate passive income. I think something that I've seen just anecdotally speaking with different folks and therapists looking to start a business that generates passive income is this is where they lose steam. They're saying, I need to make money. That is the motivator. And I'm willing to do so much if it means that I could make some money. But in the meantime, there's a huge lag time in the timeline where you have to put in usually the most effort up front when you're also not getting paid for it. There is going to inevitably be a point where you lose steam, or you just the little gremlins like to sneak in. They like to insert self-doubt. Oh, it hasn't been doing anything for the last 6 months, so it must not be working. Or you just kind of question what the point of the whole thing is. You question how much buy-in you have in whatever, product or item you're trying to build out, and you drop off before you really get a chance to see if what you're building has legs. In other words, this first point that I wanted to make in this episode is that passive income is not, I want to make money. What do I do to make that money? Instead, passive income is saying, this is important to me. It's worth diving in. And yeah, hopefully someday it also can generate some income. But it's important enough to me that it's worth doing even before I make any money from it. Here's what I kind of witness happening in real time when I have conversations with new people who first, maybe they're asking about what I do for a living, and I get to share a little bit about, these two businesses that I have, is there's that moment where somebody sort of goes, oh, that sounds really nice. You just kind of built this business and you can work however much or little you want and it pays the bills even while you're sleeping. Like, that's amazing. Yes, it is amazing. I enjoy it so much and I can't believe that I get to do this every day. But then I think what happens is we see that end result and then we make that the whole thing, that we make that the whole motivator, the whole romanticized part of it, when really I think what we should be romanticizing is the opportunity to do something that is worthwhile to us day in and day out, something that the thing itself that we're doing we enjoy it so much, or we value it so much, or it's important to us so much that we're willing to keep doing it, and that is the fantasy. I get to do the thing that I intrinsically find meaning and joy from doing day in and day out. And bonus, how lucky am I that I also get paid for it? I think if we can reframe businesses that generate passive income, not as like that business who had the goal of having passive income and then they did it, but more this person or group of people who had a vision in mind for advocating for something that is important to them, or creating something that is needed, or using their skills in a way that they enjoy day in and day out, and finding ways to be useful with those skills, whatever it might be. And that they just managed to also generate income from those skills or whatever they produced. I think that is the part that we want to emphasize. Because I think what happens is a lot of people just say like, okay, I just need to white knuckle it during this part where I'm not earning any money yet, but I just need to keep, posting consistently even though I hate it. Or I just need to, keep marketing myself even though I hate it, or I need to keep, networking, I need to keep creating content, whatever it is, even though I hate it. And then just what are my motivators? What's my motivator for today that helps me keep hustling and grinding for one more day? Because someday I really hope this could make money, because I really am not enjoying this without the money. So I think instead of asking, for the tips and tricks to keep your hustle culture, to keep you going and white knuckling it while you maybe hate whatever things you're doing day in and day out without getting paid, instead, I encourage you to think of it this way. Ask yourself, what things do you enjoy doing the most, even if you're not paid for them? What feels worth getting up early to go and get done? What activities do you feel drawn to? And it has to be something other than money or supporting my family household bills or my kids. What else are you drawn to besides that? I think some people are going to ask this question and everything that comes to mind is going to look like resting, because I think societally, on average, people are way too overworked. Even if you're a stay-at-home, you're taking care of your household as your primary productive hours, you're still way too overworked. Everyone's way too overworked. So if you're fantasizing about vacations, sleeping, R&R type things, to me, that's just your body's way of signaling wow, we could really use a whole lot of rest. We should definitely rest. So if that's where your mind goes in fantasy land of if you could do whatever you wanted, money aside, how would you spend your time every day? And your brain is just thinking about, sipping a Mai Tai on the beach. You probably need more rest. And then if you have the privilege and option of regrouping, taking some rest, and entering into more of a wise mind state, to make a DBT reference, where you feel grounded in the things that really matter to you, then you can ask yourself this question again. Okay, if money were no factor and I could just spend my time doing whatever I wanted, what am I most drawn to? And see what comes up. But before we dive into the second part of this episode, I'd like to thank Powbox for sponsoring today's episode. Based on a poll that I put out last year, only 1/4 of therapists are confident that the email they're using is HIPAA secure. That means that 3 out of 4 therapists listening to this ad right now either aren't using HIPAA secure email or aren't sure if it's HIPAA secure. In 2023, I made the switch to Powbox, and it's been smooth sailing since. Powbox is the simplest, most effective solution for mental health professionals to seamlessly integrate HIPAA security into our email, all while using our favorite email provider. It's just running smoothly and quietly in the background, keeping any potential space invaders from interfering with your emails. If you'd like to check out Powbox for yourself, they're offering Private Practice Skills listeners a special discount. Just use coupon code SKILLS at checkout to get $250 off your first year with Powbox. Thank you again to Powbox for sponsoring this episode, and now back to our conversation. Everything I just said so far was the point number 1 that I wanted to make in this episode, but point number 2, I think, is the bigger one. Because I think somebody else could give you those tips, and a certain number of people would be able to say, oh, thank you, that's so helpful, and then build from there. Of course, there's strategic tools that you don't just go and, I don't know, if I answered this question, I'd be like, I'd really love just gardening and hanging out with my friends every day for But like if you really get into it, like what matters the most to me, like I do actually feel really drawn to affecting change somehow using either my innate talents or the skills that I've already built up or by learning new skills. So, when you really get to it, you start to fill in the blanks. Some amount of people will have a very similar reaction and say, this is what I would love doing. And then we might say, great, here's some more steps for how you can build a business around that. If you are in that boat, you can totally watch Ali Abdallah's episode. I've linked to it below. So he's going to answer that for you. But here's the thing. I have walked through this line of thinking with a number of folks, a number of friends, and we get to this juncture where I say, okay, but if you could just like spend your time doing whatever you wanted, like what are you drawn to? And we hit this point where either they'll answer, well, I just need to make money, or they'll say, I don't know. I think this part of the episode is the like real talk part of the episode, the part that I just don't hear business-minded folks talk about very much, except in a very like hand-wavy way, like, oh yeah, we all have self-doubt or whatever it is. But for so many of us, we have been raised in a society, right? You didn't create this scenario, you just went with the currents that pushed you in this direction. But for so many of us, we're raised in this society where so much of our sense of worth and meaning comes from our ability to generate money, that then if we take that option off the table for just a thought exercise and we say, okay, if you don't need to make any money and you could just do whatever you wanted in a way that aligns with who you are and your values, what matters to you, so many of us don't know how to answer that question. It just comes back to the money. Like, well, no, I just need to make money. I just need to make money. That's what I need. That's the thing that I need. Or it's this kind of vast, dark room that hasn't had the lights turned on in a really long time, if ever, of like, I don't know. I don't know. I really don't know. And if that's you, please don't hear this as any sort of shaming message. But if anything, like I just feel so much compassion because this is how our society is built. And humans are built to just kind of go with the current. So how would you know any different? Right? But this is the part that I think takes intentionality to say, okay, there's other things to life aside from making money. There's more to my worth aside from making money. Or even if, you're in a family system where somebody else is making money, that system might still have a lot of its worth defined on its capacity to generate money for the household bills or whatever it might be. Ooh, yeah. A lot of our worth is built on our ability to be productive. And because society is built this way, like a lot of us can kind of go through all of life practically, where we can just sort of clock in and clock out, get our paycheck, and not really have to ask this question of like, well, what really matters to me? What really makes me me? What gives me a sense of worth aside from my ability to be productive? And I use that phrasing clock in and clock out, and I still mean it even if you're, say, running your own private practice, seeing therapy clients, you're sort of clocking in and clocking out, doing your therapy work and getting your paycheck. And we may not ever be in a position where we get to or have to ask like where our worth comes from outside of being productive. But when we are forced sometimes, or when we give ourselves the opportunity to ask the question of what gives us a sense of identity, a sense of meaning, what feels worth fighting for, advocating for, what things bring us joy, what things are fun for us to do, it may open up this sort of like vast unknown space that we've just really not explored. So if you get to this point where you're saying, hey, I'd really like to generate some passive income, tell me what to do, and I am throwing it back at you and I'm saying, well, what's really important to you? What are the things that make life worthwhile to you if money is off the table? And you're saying, I don't know, then I think the invitation and the opportunity is to focus on developing a sense of like knowing who you are, like developing a relationship with yourself, really. I know that sounds, I entered therapist woo-woo land. I mean, hey, I'm a therapist. I've got to do it sometimes, right? But Like, if you really don't know yourself, then it's going to be really difficult to then invite yourself to do something very challenging for a very long time without extrinsic rewards of money in this case. I might think of it like somebody who trains to do marathons. I have never trained to do a marathon, so marathon runners, feel free to chime in the comments if I really messed this one up. But most people, just speaking on average, most people aren't born with just like a built-in, like natural ability to just run an entire marathon. Usually you have to work at it for a long time. And also for a lot of us, running feels like work. Most people don't pay us money to run also. So there has to be some other motivator that keeps you running. But like, if let's say your whole goal was to run a whole marathon, but everything else about running the marathon you hated, it's going to be real hard to get to that marathon. Like, if your only goal was crossing the finish line and you had no other motivator related to all the work that goes into training and preparing and running so that you can run that marathon, then it's going to be so difficult to ever get across that finish line. It's also going to set you up for a crash. If you do, let's say, get across that finish line when that was your whole goal, then once you cross that finish line, what's left? You accomplished the thing. Is there anything else that's important to you? But if there's aspects about the training and the work that's involved, challenging yourself to push yourself a little bit further next time, or running that mile a little bit faster, or, finding that dopamine hit that comes when you like break through your running wall, which happens, week in and week out as you train for your marathon and then during the marathon as well. Like, if you have these other factors that motivate you, that are intrinsically rewarding, or maybe it's like the meditative practice of like left, right, as your feet are moving, your brain is processing information differently and you find that useful. Maybe it's the excuse to be outside extensively. Like, there could be anything. Everyone's going to have a different answer. But there's going to have to be other variables that you find motivating, that you are getting to actively achieve and receive throughout your training process, even though all of those intrinsic motivators don't minimize how absolutely rigorous it's going to be to train for that marathon. It has to have rewards within the entire journey, not just waiting for the quote unquote payout at the end. Again, runners out there, feel free to tell me what you think of what I just said. Whenever I don't totally script an episode, I always run the risk of kind of like rambling and losing the plot. And I think I'm hitting that edge, so I might leave it off here. Now, clearly in this episode, I didn't give the step-by-step guide for like, here's the steps to, effectively train for that marathon. Here's the steps to start your business for successfully generating passive income. But a lot of people do have those steps, and they are effective if you have that intrinsic motivation. So I'll link to some of my other episodes about passive income. I'll link to that Ali Abdaal episode that I've referenced a few times. And if I have any other links, I'll throw them in there too. Who knows? But I think the things that I shared here are relevant to anybody who's looking to start a business that generates passive income, aka leveraged income. Okay. Well, I hope you found this episode helpful wherever you are, whether you were thinking maybe someday you might start a passive income business, or if maybe you've been giving it a go for a while and it's been tough. And also just know that like it's kind of universally tough. Like, training for a marathon is universally tough. Like, it's gonna be hard. That's part of it. But hopefully it's also intrinsically motivating or enjoyable or meaningful in some way, even through all the hard bits along the way. If you have any tips as far as overcoming the passive income hurdles that can pop up, feel free to leave them in the comments below so others can glean from your experience as well. And until next time, from one therapist to another, I wish you well.